It's my very great pleasure to introduce our first speaker of the day, David Brin. How many of you have read his novels? I thought you might have. His science fiction novels. He is an astrophysicist. He gained his PhD at UCSD, so he's a local boy who's made more than good. And he studies comets and other particles in the cosmos. And he's also had the privilege and the pleasure, or maybe not, of having one of his books, The Postman, made into a motion picture, and Kevin Costner was the star. But today he's going to be talking about the big question of existence. So please welcome David Brin.
What could be a bigger picture than the question of existence? Can technology empower freedom and human survival? Now, the context in which this is set is vast. There is one aspect in the upper left-hand corner. It's called Fermi's silent cosmos. We'll be getting to that first, but we'll also talk about how many people are afraid that we'll repeat past failure modes that destroyed past civilizations, whether or not civilizations go in a big cycle that grow old and die, whether or not we have the power in our minds to conceive enough foresight to be able to avoid the pitfalls that lie ahead of us. We'll talk briefly about the singularity, some of the traps that stand in the way of us getting there properly, and some of the tools that might help us get there, all in less than 17 minutes. I usually give Castro-length speeches about these topics individually, so let's plunge ahead. Fermi's silent cosmos is based upon a question that Enrico Fermi asked at the end of World War II. Many of you are familiar with it. His students were talking about how exciting it will be when we meet aliens and how obvious it must be that there must be aliens out there. Frank Drake's famous equation. Oh, I'm pressing all the wrong buttons. Frank Drake's famous equation there. You put in all the parameters about whether or not, how many life-type worlds there ought to be and how frequently life ought to arise. It seems like it ought to, given the Miller-Urey-Orgel experiments that occurred up here at UCSD. And yet, the radio telescopes, I've been involved in SETI for 30 years, the radio telescopes seem to have come up with nothing so far. Now, I can talk about the reasons why they've come up with nothing so far, but the fundamental issue facing us today is, what does that imply about us? If civilizations should be frequent out there, and we're seeing no signs not only of radio using civilizations in space, but any sign that Earth was ever visited across the 2 billion years that it was prime real estate. 2 billion years when it had an oxygen atmosphere and no human beings to defend it, Independence Day style. The point is, that's a great big experimental test tube result. The apparent emptiness of the galaxy is explained by different people depending upon their emotional investment in this topic. They choose one of the factors of the Drake equation and say that Earth must be rare. And certainly Earth is rare among the 500 planets that we've discovered so far, just in the last 10 years. Or that life must be rare, or that civilization must be rare, or that civilizations kill themselves off. The point is, we might either be rare, and the filter that is keeping the numbers small lie behind us, or there is some filter that lies ahead of us that culls down the number of bright young species that actually make it. And that's the scary thing. That's what scared us about the nuclear bomb. That's what should scare us every time we just come across one of these new things and make us think, is this the filter? Might this be it? Might this be the big mistake? And my new novel called Existence is really cheery. It goes through all the different possible ways we may blow it. But there's hope as well. Now, one of the key themes is repetition of past errors. Jared Diamond's great book, Collapse, talks about how frequently things in the past, civilizations in the past, failed because they repeated the same errors over and over again. Like errors having to do with a failure to adapt to environmental degradation, failure to adapt to the fact that their herds of goats and sheep and their irrigation projects were actually poisoning the land that they were irrigating. Mistakes that were made by past civilizations more slowly than the mistakes we're making now. The difference with us now is twofold. One, we're making the mistakes far faster. And two, with science, and because we're making the mistakes faster, we're noticing, which our ancestors did not. Now, which is the more important fact? I guess we'll find out. Stay tuned across the next 100 years. Now, one prescribed solution is renunciation. Jared Diamond points out that there were several past civilizations that lived in tune with their environment. It happens they were also tyrannies. They were also tyrannies that lived by the ancient human social order of the pyramid. And they managed to, the Tokugawas in Japan banned the wheel because it tore up the roads. That's one way of doing it. It's not really our way. If you take a look on the left, you have this typical pyramidal social structure with a few at the top lording it over masses below. We fell into this social structure everywhere that human beings discovered metals and agriculture, where big guys would pick up metal implements and take other men's women and wheat. And it's what you would do, it's what you would do, it's what you would do. Because we're all descended from the harems of those guys. I was at a talk last night here at UCSD. This guy's looking for Genghis Khan's tomb. It turns out 5% of human males on this planet are descended from Genghis Khan. He had a very successful harem, and we're descended from him. Ladies, it explains a lot. But we can exercise self-control, we can get better, and the proof of it is that there is another type of social structure. One in which there's well-off people and there are poor people, but the well-off, the middle class, outnumbers the poor. That should be on our flag. That should be the flag or symbol of our civilization. The Enlightenment civilization, the Enlightenment diamond. And you'll notice that there is less poverty. Because when you outnumber the poor, you no longer shrug and assume the poor will always be with us, as they say in the Bible. Instead, they're a minority, a lake of bitterness surrounded by prosperity, and suddenly it's somebody's fault. It's not so much somebody's fault as we haven't solved it enough, and it will never go away. The poor will always go with us if this thing works, because the diamond will keep rising, and we'll keep having higher expectations and higher notions of what it means to be poor, higher notions of what's acceptable. This may not be what we've done successfully, completely to your satisfaction so far, but the fact that you're dissatisfied with something that's glorious compared to the past is an example of the great madness of the Enlightenment, the magnificent madness of ambition, the belief that we can be better than our ancestors, and the belief that this does not insult our ancestors because that's what they would have wanted us to be. I'll attack the right, I'll attack the left because I despise the stupid left-right political axis. We should abandon it if for no other reason because it's French. But the fact of the matter is, one of the madnesses of the left is that if we brag about how far we've come, we're somehow insulting our ancestors. Duh! Would you be disappointed if your children were stupider than you, your grandchildren, if they had a civilization as dumb as this? You're working hard to make them better than you. You want them to be Star Trek. Well, then why shouldn't we be better than our ancestors? That honors them. In any event, can we do this? Because the problem is that this had better be in a tractor state. And it's hard because almost all of human nature, genetics, pulls us toward this state, the natural human pyramid. And I believe that's one of the explanations for the great silence, the Fermi paradox. I believe that a great many intelligent civilizations out there naturally fall into the kind of social pattern that almost all human civilizations fell into, because it serves the genetic self-interest of the elite. And they would use the new tools, the new powers, the new surveillance to make sure that this happened, and nothing would ever stop it ever again. And that's why I wrote The Transparent Society, my nonfiction book about will technology force us to choose between privacy and freedom. All right, there are many potential pitfalls, so many it's hard to count, but I'm going to tell you one really quick. I'm going to talk real fast. When I was at Caltech, undergraduate back in it was before this whole internet thing, although I predicted it in Earth. There are web pages. The point is that We were confused and terrified by the notion that as human civilization kept learning more and more and more and more at an accelerating pace, in order to keep up in a given scientific field, you'd have to know more and more about less and less. The vocabulary would narrow down. You wouldn't even know if somebody was duplicating your work in the next building because their vocabulary would be different. It would become harder and harder, like Sisyphus, to push the boulder. You wouldn't get out of grad school until you were 70. It looked impossible to avoid. It was logically impossible to avoid. And it's a perfect example about how all the things where you logically assume that things must be thus aren't necessarily true. Instead, like a train passing through town, the internet came, many new things came, and we got something else. Suddenly, the worry about shallow-mindedness went away. Suddenly, we had computer literature searches, we had Google, we had an immense ability to find people and connect to them across specialties all around the world. I know many 60-year-old professors who are smarter now than they were when I met them 30 years ago. There has been a functional increase in the IQ of almost all the scientists I know. They are more agile, less committed to prim boundaries. And we see this across the entire internet. Is people are making connections in all directions. But here's the problem. Tweet, twatty, whatever the heck it is that you guys are doing. 140 characters, texting, please. I'm sounding like some grouch, get off my lawn, but it's a matter of whether you not have lifespan to waste on things that aren't discourse, that are not going to move you ahead to solving the next problem. And there are people out there who believe that we are in the process of, instead of going into narrow-minded over-specialization, we are heading down the path of scatterbrained shallow-mindedness. The point is, have any of you been to Rome and seen Michelangelo's greatest work? It is the statue of Moses. It's in a small side church. You hardly ever see it if you go to Rome, but it's his greatest work. It looks like he's about to stand up, and there are horns on his head. Clearly, this guy was not disrespectful to Moses. That's quite a statue, and that's quite a guy. Why are there horns on his head? Well, it was a mistranslation of the word lamps, and they thought, oh, what could he mean, lamps on his brow? It's a similar word as horns, so it must mean horns, and so for 1,000 years, Moses and all Jews were depicted with horns on their heads. The point is, that these are roughly in the position, actually these should be lower down, of the prefrontal lobes. These are the lamps on our brow through which we think about the future. We do the Gedanken experiment, as Einstein called it. The thought experiment about where we go in the future. And I could go on and on for an hour about this. These organs that let us think, what would happen if I do this? And these are the organs that are used in anticipation. But when I consult with the defense people, all the people who are involved in our national defense, I keep pointing them out to them that anticipation always fails. And what we need is something else, the partner of anticipation, resilience. I'll skip past the singularity because I don't have time, but I will point out one thing. Our singularity friends who think that when we cross this particular threshold of numbers of millions of floating point operations per second, they are assuming that it's based upon the number of human synapses. There is now potential reason to believe that there is computation that goes on inside the neurons and the glial and astrocyte cells. And if that's the case, then it's an order of magnitude, 2 orders, 3 orders of magnitude more harder than we thought to be us. So Terminator's not going to get here as soon as we thought. Now, there are lots of people who are worried about the singularity. Lots of people who think it's going to be exciting. Ray Kurzweil can't wait to be immortal. Werner Vinge coined the term here in San Diego. He's a little more iffy. Then you have Michael Crichton, who shows up as a character in my new novel, who never met a new technology that he didn't think we would abuse. Notice this in all of Michael Crichton's stories, is that if the new technology had not been kept secret, the plot goes away. How can we solve this problem? We need new tools. All through the last 4 centuries, we have learned new tools for three things. The glass lens gave us new tools for expanding vision. The printing press gave us new tools for expanding knowledge. And perspective gave us new tools for dividing our attention. Every generation since then has multiplied by at least a factor of 10 the amount that they could see, the amount that they could know, and the amount that they could attend to. And every generation, curmudgeon said, the human beings cannot adapt to this. What in our background prepared us to be able to deal with an exponentiation of what we can see, know, and attend to? And now we're exponentiating it at the rapidest pace ever. And it's incredible. And you hear the grouches saying, that's not the path. And yet, then you have people like Rebecca Solnit. I pointed this out right after 9/11, who pointed out that all the good things that happened on 9/11, every single effective measure that was taken by our civilization, was taken by amateurs, by citizens. It was the day that professionalism and anticipation utterly failed. But we did not. Because we were connected, because we were agile, because, as Rebecca Solnit points out in this great book, that we form community spirit when we need to. So, we come around full circle to these different perspectives on existence, each one of them worth an hour, 2 hours, 10 hours of detailed discussion. The point, though, is this. Our existence depends, ultimately, on whether or not we can defy whatever odds there are out there, whether we can defy whatever is winnowing out and filtering out intelligent life in the cosmos. There is more than just our species, our culture, our art, our descendants, our children that depend upon us solving this problem. It may be that there are thousands, millions of species out there that are doing the same mistake over and over again, or the same set of mistakes, the same set of pitfalls, the same minefield. And they need somebody to come along and do for them what the SETI guys are yearning for. Oh, please give us the answer. Well, it's too late. We chose not to use nuclear weapons. So we already have a check mark on our ability to see a problem and decide to move around it. Now, if we can do the same thing, we did the same thing with the ozone hole, we have a lot more ahead of us. And we don't have time for stupid ideologies. We don't have time for dumb notions like political axes. What we need, what we have to do, is find time for confidence in ourselves. Thanks.